a video. And if you guys, after this video is finished, go ahead and put your view in speaker view. Okay, so here we go.
Nadia Bilchik is a television news anchor, keynote speaker, author, trainer, and communications consultant.
19 #1 best-selling, have been nominated and won so many awards throughout your careers.
She has a wealth of experience interviewing and consulting with well-renowned figures, celebrities, and corporations. Nadia speaks on how to get people to like you, trust you, and want to do business with you.
Over the last few weeks, the entire world has been monitoring the treatment of your grandfather, Nelson Mandela. And my job was to introduce it and provide.
With topics like leveraging the power of your personal presence, networking for success, and lighting the fire. Nadia Bilchik.
So it is absolutely wonderful to be here with you and really extraordinary people of Georgia Hope. And it's interesting that Nikki asked the question about what was it like to meet George Clooney and is he really so sexy? And what's it like to be in the presence of Nelson Mandela? But interestingly enough, the question I get asked most, and this is whether I'm speaking in Dallas or Dubai or Durban, people want to know, before you stand up in front of a group of people or before you go live on television, does anybody want to unmute and answer and tell me what you think the #1 question I get asked is? Or you can put it in the chat. Do I get?
Nervous.
Yes. People want to know if I get nervous. So right off the bat, I am going to share my secret antidote to nerves with you. Now, the first thing you do if you start feeling nervous, or you start feeling that state, it's almost as if your sane, rational brain has been hijacked by your primitive brain. It's a state that was commonly known as fight, flight, or freeze. So I want you to think back. Have you ever had a moment where you just feel panicked? It happened to me once. I was about to go live on television and my teleprompter went black. And I had that moment of terror. Some people describe it like being in a black tunnel. So what I did in that moment was I started to think about moments that validated me, moments that were happy moments. And it was interesting because this happened many years ago, and I started to think about my little girls and the fact that the next day they were having a joint birthday party. And somehow, by thinking about things that made me happy and brought me joy, I started to relax. I went live on air. I managed to do it perfectly, even though I had no teleprompter. And I looked back at what had happened, and I realized that what I had done was actually backed by neuroscience. And the neuroscience was that if you're in a moment of discomfort or panic, and you start to think about happy moments and good things in your life, you can shift the dialogue and create a new neural pathway. Because very often negative thought sticks to us like Velcro, whereas positive thought is like Teflon. So the first thing I wanted to share with you today in what we're going to call lighting the fire, tips to build rapport and lead remotely, is that everything actually begins with yourself and your mindset and how you're thinking. And as Lee put it so well, this is a particularly difficult time. Whether it's difficult for you personally, it's a difficult time in the world. And we don't have control over what is going on in the world. What we do have control over is our own headspace. So I'm going to ask you to think about what are things that if you are feeling particularly down, if you are in a particularly high stakes meeting or virtual call, what are things that you could think about that would automatically remind you of the joy in your life? So I am going to shift and show you the slide of some of the things that are on my, what I call positive emotional memory database. Some of the things that are on my positive emotional memory database, things that when I'm feeling a little bit down or I'm feeling a little bit anxious, I think about things that validate me. And here are just a couple of things that are on my positive emotional memory database. If you've just joined us, put me on speaker view so you can see. There I have a moment with John Oliver. I have meeting Nelson Mandela. I always tell people my small children were on my positive emotional memory database. When they became adults, I took them off. No, when they became teenagers, I took them off. Now that they're adults, they're back on, I have to say. But I want you to think about, for you, Keisha and Ashley and Raquel and Megan and Jennifer and Kay, what are some things that when you reflect on, you are reminded of your success? So it's a very interesting thing. We often focus on what's just happened. And John Kehoe wrote a book on mind power, and he said, weak and scattered thoughts are weak and scattered forces, but strong and concentrated thoughts are strong and concentrated forces. And it has been proven that it is impossible to be deeply upset and depressed if you're thinking about happy things. I recently interviewed Dr. Galen Cole, who's a psychotherapist. And he spoke about this and how he uses this, and it's interesting speaking to you in the world of therapy, how he uses the ability for people to visualize positive past memory as a way of converting, and he actually calls it thought conversion therapy. And he's telling me this in my interview with him, and I go, I've been using thought conversion therapy in my talks and my presentations and in my own ability to combat nervousness and anxiety for so many years. So as we navigate this particularly unprecedented time in our lives, and not only we've been speaking about COVID-19, but the events that have happened over the last week, 10 days, the feelings that it evokes in all of us are mammoth. I mean, we could go around today and just talk about how we've been feeling, what impact it's had on our psyche. As I mentioned to you all at the beginning of this call, I grew up in apartheid South Africa. The last week, so many things that have happened in this country have triggered lots of feelings and thoughts and emotions. And the one thing that we all have power over is our own inner world. So all I'm suggesting is that in your remote leadership, in your leadership, you become very aware. We call it meta-awareness, where you become deeply aware of your energy and what's going on with you. And if I had to leave you right now because there was some internet blackout, I want to leave you with building up inventory of positive past experiences and things in your life that validate you. Because if we had to go around right now and I had to ask each of you, what is the one thing in your life that brings you joy? I assure you we would have a lot of smiles. So please do that. And it's so important that we do it because anytime we get on a call with one of our team members or a client or somebody we're working with, your level of energy is so tangible. And sometimes we have to act up even if we're feeling down. So think about this positive emotional memory database. Now, I wanted to share 4 things today that will really assist in dealing with our remote leadership, but also how we come across remotely. So feeling good about yourself is often much more challenging than it may appear. And a couple of years ago, I was actually doing an interview with Anthony Hopkins. And I remember walking into the interview and I had just moved from Johannesburg, South Africa to Atlanta. And I was having one of those days of just really feeling down. And I remember walking into the interview and thinking, he's so much more powerful than me. He's so much more successful than me. And having that moment of panic, and I inserted my positive emotional memory database, which is that reminder of my story and what I've achieved. And I walked into the interaction and we had a fabulous conversation. Conversely, I was once interviewing Richard Gere, And I remember saying to him, I believe you're doing a movie with Julia Roberts. And he said, who told you that? By the way, it was Runaway Bride. But I wasn't focused on my deep positive emotional memory, and I allowed him to derail me. So I share with you another thing, and Honoré de Balzac said it. He said, there is no greater impediment to getting on well with other people than being ill at ease with yourself. Now, you're all in leadership positions, and you're expected to lead and motivate and listen to others. But if you've got a whole lot going on with you, it's very difficult to do that. And sometimes we just need a moment to center and say, how do I bring myself back to a sense of well-being? So the second part of lighting a fire, and I promised you 4 foundations to build rapport and lead your teams remotely, is the ability to show genuine interest. Now, you all know that the people on your teams depend on you very often to be motivated. The work you do is difficult. As Nikki just said earlier, not what did we call it? There was the term, you said the phantom pandemic?
Shadow pandemic.
The shadow pandemic. You're dealing with people who are in so much pain. And your ability then to motivate the people on your teams is so critical. And are we showing genuine interest in every single person we impact? So think about what's going on with you. And then do we really show interest? And you know what I call showing interest? I call showing interest, and by the way, I'm going to have the chat up if any of you have any questions. I call showing genuine, deeply concerned interest a BLO. And particularly, I'm talking to you, you are trained in this area. But so often, to Lee's point, there's so much going on externally that we forget to do some of the very things that are the most important in motivating our teams. And showing genuine interest is what I call a BLO. Any guesses as to what a BLO is? It's a blinding light of the obvious, right? Of course, we must show genuine interest. But I'm hoping that it's a result of our time on this session together. There is not an opportunity where you aren't relating to one of your team members or your clients where you aren't paying full attention. Now, in this remote world, it is very difficult to do that because there's so much happening. It's so much easier when we're in person. If Michelle Harris and I were sitting next to each other, it's a whole lot easier. Now you're doing it remotely. We've worked out that if people don't have their cameras on, they are 67% more likely to be distracted. But even with their cameras on, there's so much distraction that's happening, right? You're going to multitask. So, are we showing the kind of engaging interest that forces people to know that you are fully present? So, I want to go back on some basics. Have you sat down with the people whose lives you impact and for your team members and said, what's your biggest challenge at the moment? It's going to be different for everybody. And in fact, sometimes we call it sweet and sour. So it's what's your biggest challenge at the moment. Now, Michelle Harris's challenge is going to be different to who was at home with 2 children. It was Ashley, right? You're at home with 2 children. And this is basic foundational rapport building skills. And what I saw myself doing today was being your vitamin B shot. It was saying what Emerald says, just before he adds flavor to food and before he says, bam, he said, let's kick it up a notch. You all do wonderful, wonderful work. But could we elevate the quality of our interactions by taking ourselves off autopilot? And it's more critical than ever that in a remote world, we take ourselves off autopilot and we are deeply conscious. We have this meta-awareness in every single interaction. So if you look back at the last month, since we've got into the virtual world since 10th of March, can you honestly say that on every single virtual call, you have paid your full attention? And then what other platforms are you using? So we have to look at showing genuine interest. Does Georgia Hope have a Slack or a Google Hangout or some kind of forum where people can share pictures of Ashley's children and Carrie Ann's going windsurfing on a Sunday? You know, it's that reminder that we all want the same things, right? We want to be heard, we want to be validated, we want to be understood. And we all want that. Are we doing that for our team members? And if we ask them what's their biggest challenge, are we really listening and saying, tell me more about that? How did that make you feel? In what way? I love Bill Nye, the science guy. He says, everyone you meet knows something you don't. And he also says, sometimes in conversation, you've got to put yourself aside. Well, it's all very well doing that when you've got screaming children in the background and you're trying to motivate somebody and talk, and there's all that happening. So it's just important that we show that kind of genuine interest that makes people validated. I do a lot of work around presence. So when you hear Nikki Raymond speak, you know she's very commanding and she's got great presence. But we also know that your ability to make other people feel important and validated and heard is equally critical. And are we doing enough of that virtually? And then it's also deciding what are the forums that we do it on virtually. And this would be a whole other discussion, because we want to create an empathetic culture of belonging. And to create an empathetic culture of belonging, it doesn't happen in one call. It doesn't happen in one meeting. Are you calling people? Are you emailing them? Are you sending them items of interest? How are we touching people virtually so that we are making them feel valued? And we know that feeling valued is the single most motivating factor in all of us. Because I can assure you, if I had to go around and to all of you, you've had managers and you've had team leads that have made you feel validated and appreciated and heard, and you will go above and beyond. And you've had people who've done the converse. But when you think about people in your life who have motivated you, you are now that person for them. And you've got a very interesting group of people. And I happen to know, because my nephew is now a proud Georgia Hoper. Is that a word? At CNN, we call ourselves CNNers. What do we call people who are part of your team? Georgia Hopefuls. Georgia Bringing Hope. Georgia Hopesters. Well, he's a proud Georgia Hoper. But my point is, the work you do is hard. I have heard about some of the work and some of the issues you deal with. It's deep and dark, and everybody needs motivation and everyone needs fuel, right? You need the fuel and you're getting it in this situation, but are you giving it in the way you should? So I go back to the I of showing genuine interest. As a journalist, I learned a very easy framework to interview people, and I want to share it with you as leaders when you are talking to team members. And we do call them team members. Nikki, is that the correct term, or do we have another term?
Team, staff, family.
Staff. Okay. I know Target, because Target calls customers guests, so don't say customers. You know, you have to know the terminology. But think about staff. So I worked out that everybody has 3 phases of their lives. We've all got a past, a present, and a future. Have you sat down with your staff and asked them about their past? And it doesn't just mean, hello, Carrie Ann Sanford, tell me about your past. It means, where did you grow up? What was one thing in your childhood that was most challenging? What's one thing one of your parents ever said to you, or a grandparent that stayed with you? Ask specific questions about people's past. Because we know that people want to tell their stories. Every one of you wants to tell your story, right? And there's something wonderful in people listening to your story, because if we look at this group of people that we have here, each one of you has a remarkable story. And then we have our present, we have our past, we have our present. So I said to Nikki earlier on, you know, what's it like being in lockdown? And she told me about her 2 kids. I met Nikki as this very, very articulate, lovely woman. But unless I take the time to have a real conversation, I never go from a connection to a conversation to a collaboration. We remain cardboard cutouts. And it is so critical that we go beyond what we just see. At a time where America is facing a crisis, and there is this perception or reality around bigotry and racism, the onus is on each and every one of us to get to know our people beneath, beyond. Who are you? Ask questions and ask them in a respectful way. I had a fascinating conversation on Sunday with 3 African-American women because I wanted to say, as a white American, what do I need to know? A very difficult conversation to have. And I can probably only say this to you because of what they told me. And I said to Deborah Riley Draper in the conversation, I said, what do you want us to do and to know? And she said to me, Nadia, I want you to have these kind of conversations. These are not easy conversations to have. But people know intrinsically and they know intuitively if you have radical regard and mutual respect. And asking these questions and going beyond what I just see. And by the way, I would say diversity and inclusion is not only about this, my age, background, ethnicity. It's also about personality style. There's some people on your team who are natural extroverts, right? They are going to speak up. They're going to answer your questions. There's some people who are so much more thoughtful and reserved. And are you taking the time with those people to show genuine interest? And even on a call like this, because we're going to have Q&A and we are going to have conversation, there are going to be those of you who will automatically be involved, but you might have people who you notice don't reach out to you. So in the DISC personality assessment, and I don't know how familiar you are, and I know you are all trained and highly educated, but I like DISC because it's very easy to teach. But I want you to think about this on this call. Some of you are fast-paced and outspoken, right? How many by a show of hands? Show me hands, fast-paced and outspoken. Okay, got you, got you. How many of you are more thoughtful and reserved? Show of hands. Okay, show of hands. How many of you say you're in between? Right? Okay, because there are shades of in between. How many of you are very precise and analytical? Show of hands. How many of you very big picture? Don't tell me about the pain, just show me the baby. As leaders, thank you, Kerry, for smiling. As leaders, you need to know, are your people very precise and analytical? Are they very big picture? So showing genuine interest means tuning in and understanding that we treat others not as we would like to be treated, but as they would like to be treated. And you know, it's all very well, if Chris is on my team or his staff, I might say, Chris, I tend to be a very abrupt kind of big picture person. What is the best way? How would you like me to communicate with you? How often do you want me to reach out? Ask people. Ask people. But just because somebody isn't communicating or connecting doesn't mean they don't want to. And really, when I look at these extraordinary people in front of me, and I know what it took you to be where you are, and I know that the work you do takes a dedication and a certain type of individual, please don't forget that all the training you've had when dealing with patients or clients, do that with your team. The same level of empathy, the same level of deep understanding, the same level of seeing the world not, there's a famous philosopher, Varela, he says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And I believe in having these conversations and what we're dealing with in this country today, if more people did that and looked at the world from another's point of view. These are so critical. These things are so important. And yet, if we are on autopilot, we may forget to do some of the basic things that build deep rapport and deep trust, which is what we want. So showing genuine interest as leaders is so foundational. And then I talk about the R of lighting a fire. Well, now there are a couple of things about the R. It's about relationships, 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 which are absolutely critical. Our ability to build relationships and to understand that every single person on our team, on our staff, are we nurturing that relationship? And are we then engaging with a level of energy and enthusiasm? And what's interesting about communication is it is very much like this. I'm going to show you what it's very much like, and I'm going to ask you to think about why you think it's like this. Why do you think? And by the way, I'm showing you Atlanta at night. I just thought I would change it up a bit for interest, virtual interest. That's a picture of what? That's a picture of a? I'm waiting for somebody to unmute and tell me what they can see in my background.
A spaceship.
A spaceship. And what's the R word for a spaceship?
Rocket.
Yes, full marks. Thank you. Excellent. So it's a rocket. In a rocket, there's two fundamental components. There's your payload part and there's the fire underneath, the propulsion. Any rocket aficionados here? Rocket scientists? Okay, so for a lay person like me, when I see a rocket launch, I see the rocket part and I see the propulsion part, right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off. Well, I want you to think about your rocket as what you say. And your propulsion is how you say it. So your rocket is your content and your propulsion is your delivery. Can you imagine a rocket that had faulty propulsion? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It either wouldn't take off or it would dive. As leaders, your understanding of what you say is critical, but the impact you have in how you say it is even more critical. Because if I've got an issue with Jennifer Cooper and I say, Jennifer, what happened? As opposed to, Jennifer, what happened? Totally different response, right? Now, if you think about this in person, so many more cues. I'm meeting with a staff member and I can talk to them and I can read their body language and I can see what's going on. And now we're often having to do this virtually. So if we're doing it on this kind of platform, I'm doing a debrief and I know you have consultations with your therapists and you look and you may need to, thinking of a nice word for discipline, let's say redirect, right? I'm looking at someone I have to redirect. So am I aware of what I'm saying and how I'm saying it? Now, if it's on a virtual call like this, I've still got eye contact. I've still got body language. They can still hear my voice. If I'm doing it over the phone, my voice is the what and the how. My voice is the rocket and the propulsion. If I'm doing it on text or email, my words are the what and the how. And all I'm doing to remind us, what do we want to do? We are creating an empathetic culture of belonging so people are motivated to do their best possible work. And are we aware of the power that each one of us on this call has as to how we make other people feel? Maya Angelou said it so beautifully, and I will remind you how important this is. People don't remember exactly what you say, but they remember the way you make them
feel.
I mean, you know, is that not a classic? Is that not a classic? And by the way, I always say you're on this call for two reasons. You're here for yourselves, but there's a lot of what I'm saying that you don't need, but some of your staff members may need to be aware of that. They may need some finessing. And just reminding people, and feel free to use these exercises, the verbal and the nonverbal, the verbal and the nonverbal. Now, the E of lighting the fire is engaging with energy, excitement, and enthusiasm, both verbally and non-verbally. So as far as the fact that when we're on these kind of calls, there's what you say and there's how you say it, I hope you notice that I am looking into the camera. What I've been seeing with a lot of people that I've been coaching around telemedicine, I had a group of concierge doctors recently, and they were either doing this because they were looking at the people. Do you see when I do this? Like now I can see you, but I'm not looking at you. Or for some reason they were doing that. I saw a lot of nostril hairs. So, number one, when I am doing these type of calls, do I make the other person feel like I am actually looking at them? And it's a bit counterintuitive because I want to sometimes look down, right? So number one is your eye level. This is part of your delivery. There was a professor at UCLA University, and he said, and funny enough, he was also a therapist. He said 7% of the way a message is received is actual words. He said 93% is nonverbal. Interesting. 93% is nonverbal. So are we aware? I always say to people in my sessions, I think I save marriages, and I'll tell you why. Because instead of saying to your husband, darling, you are driving me mad, you just say, darling, you're driving me mad. Right? It's not what, it's how. But even for those of you who've got your own children, I was hoping today will be helpful for your virtual leadership and for building rapport. But these are foundational skills for all of our communication, right? So number one, where am I looking? That's a delivery skill. Number two is your lighting. If you are on virtual calls and that's how you are communicating with your staff, with your team members, some of you have the light in front of you, which is so much better. If you have the light behind you, you look like a cardboard cutout. If you look like a cardboard cutout, I can't see you. I can't read you. I can't see your face. This medium is hard enough anyway. Now you're making it equally difficult because I can't see you. Now, you know, one of your therapists or your team members isn't going to say to you, oh, you know, Miss Erin, I can't see you. I can only hear you and you're making it difficult. They're not going to say that to you, but the overall impression that you create is that you're not fully there and present. So number two is lighting. Number three is your background. Now, we are all aware we're at home, and you can see I've got a green screen so I can key in my lights, and I'll show you some fun other backgrounds, but that is up to you. You are not going as a television talk show host who's now teaching. So there I've got my Atlanta background, which is fine and neutral. And I think if I was doing therapy, I'd probably have something like that, or just my genuine home, right? But what's interesting, and I've spoken to a lot of physicians around telemedicine and around if you've got someone that you're talking to and there's an interesting poster behind, say, I see that interesting poster. It's okay to comment, or Lee, I can see an interesting piece of artwork behind you. Does it have a story? So we're using these things to engage, but make sure that your background is professional. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're not perfect and life's not perfect, but does it represent you in the best possible way? The way you dress. Now, our personal brand is how we show up in the minds of the people we influence. And the way that you show up in my mind is based on a multitude of factors. Yes, you could be the best dressed person in the world and you can lack integrity and not be a role model, and it doesn't help. But don't underestimate. Now, you don't need to do what I'm doing, which is wearing a full jacket. And I have put on a jacket because I wanted to look authoritative. Your level of authority is based on three things: S, P, and F: structure, proportion, and fit. The more authoritative you want to look, the more structure, proportion, and fit you want to have. The less authoritative you want to look, the less structure, proportion, and fit. In your area of work, in an environment of business casual, and I wish this is more of a discussion than me talking to you, and that's what I miss most about the classroom right now, is as long as you go, is the way I am dressing in harmony with, congruent with, the overall way I want to be perceived by the person I am looking to impact? Because you are role models. And because it is very easy to show up in your pajamas, eating your cereal, and look sloppy. And you might be the best leader in the world, but you have to say to yourself, is that the best impression of someone when I want to come across as a role model? And that is just a question to you. We are not looking for perfection. This is a tough environment. We are working from home. I've had dogs walk in and husbands walk past me. Husbands, I mean, I only have one. Actually, it might be quite nice to have a few, but yes, I've had, but all of that. And it's happened and you go on with it, right? People are very forgiving, but what we do have control over is our light can be in front of us. Just get a lamp and put it in front of you. Your camera can be eye level. I love the fact that you've all got your cameras on, and I suppose that was something that was asked of you. Some of you don't, and it is understandable. And I do understand that you don't have your camera on because this is a webinar. Oh, thank you, Candy Howard. And I don't want to make anybody feel bad or be on the spot. But when you are communicating, and sometimes, guys, it's just not possible. I fully understand, believe me. but don't underestimate the power of at least people seeing you. It adds another layer of deep connection than being on just a phone. If you do go off your call, have a nice photograph of you that represents you in the best possible way. I recommend that you have some kind of photograph. It doesn't have to be, I've got a headshot, which I'll show you now, and I think that's a little bit too formal. Can you see? I'm going to change it because that was taken with such good light and makeup that I don't look like that. But I want to make it more real, but at the same time, a professional representation of myself. So that's what I want you to think about, guys. We've spoken about 4 fundamental things here, and I will go back to the 4 fundamental things that I would like you to keep in mind for life going forward and for being in person, and which is you as a leader. It starts also with self, perception of self, having a positive emotional memory database, reminding yourself that the level of energy you project is tangible, it's transferable, and people feel it, and it's tough time. And then the deep ability to show interest by asking people questions, by understanding their personality style, by understanding their preferences. And then it's the ability to really build and nurture those relationships. And nurturing relationships is something that takes effort. It doesn't just happen. And then engaging with the level of excitement and energy and enthusiasm, both verbally and non-verbally. And I will just reiterate that at a time in America where we have seen the destruction of racism and bigotry, the onus is on each and every single one of us. I love the quote, if it's to be, it's up to me. And more we can say, we can control ourselves, our attitudes, and how we make people feel. And our ability to do that and to reach out to people who at first glance may seem different to ourselves and honor them and show radical regard and real respect is so important. I look forward to sharing a couple of resources with you. The interview that I did on Sunday with 3 remarkable women who educated me. And I will tell you, I was nervous to have the conversation. I said to them, I would much rather be drinking Chardonnay with you in a Buckhead restaurant. But this is a conversation we are having right now. And then the ability to really just tune into others and see them. And I know you all do it, otherwise you wouldn't be here and you wouldn't be in the roles you're in, but it's so important to be doing this now. So at this point, I'm going to take not only questions from you, and you can put them in the chat or just unmute and ask. Just say question, lovely, I'd love it to be interactive. But also if you've got best practices around this. If you are doing something right now with your team that has worked so well, like for example, you just got, or you had a conversation, or you asked this question, or you checked in with them, gallery view again, perfect. So we're going to go to gallery view again. Everybody go to gallery view. That's very helpful. So we can see everybody. I always say to people, network most when you need it least. And nurturing those relationships means being a go-giver as much as a go-getter. You have to be able to be both. And I think how wonderful that you work for an organization who honors you and wants to invest in you in this way. That's pretty cool. So thoughts, ideas, questions from any of you. You can ask me about a difficult situation, about someone on your staff who's maybe reluctant to engage in this way, some of the challenges you're having. Thoughts, ideas, a current situation, anybody, hands up or unmute, ask me a question. I know it's difficult. So in the same way that I'm asking you a question and part of you is going, I just don't want to say the wrong thing because I'm in a public forum. So what we sometimes do, and I won't do this now, is we break people into groups if you are doing that. And in their groups, what we find is people are much happier to talk to 2 or 3 people and then report back. Because that way it's less intimidating. But I really urge you, if you've got a question, overcome that fear. You know, what I've ascertained is, if I said to you right now, who would it be helpful if they were on your radar? What stops you reaching out to them? there's always that sense of fear of what if I make a fool of myself? What if I reach out and they don't treat me in the way that I would like? And that's not real fear. That's fear based on perception. It's false events appearing real. So anybody, a question, a thought, a challenge, or a best practice. So I'm just going to call on you randomly then, and I'm going to say, Michelle, out of everything I've said, what has been most helpful so far, if you can unmute?
What I've been thinking about as you were going through and talking about hold on, I've got to look at my notes because I was taking notes when I was looking away, the positive emotional memory database.
Right.
Is something that I teach my clients, and that's using the Glaad technique.
Tell us about that.
Well, you just identify it. It again is an acronym as well. You identify something you're grateful for, something you've learned, something you've achieved, and something that brings you joy.
Oh, and it's called the
Glaad, G-L-A-D.
Okay, I love that. That's an excellent one. You know, Brene Brown said, it is not joy that makes us grateful, but gratitude that makes us joyful. And having a positive emotional memory database is just another way of doing that. Another thing that's helpful for me is to say what's gone right, because goodness knows, I can tell you since the 12th of March what's gone wrong. Right? What's gone right. But we're so busy telling this to other people, are we telling it to ourselves? So thank you for that. Ashley, any thoughts, anything that resonated with you that you think, yes, that was helpful, I can use that?
So I was thinking, as you were talking, I'm thinking about when I am talking with my team, thinking about like asking them about themselves. I started a virtual walk that my team does on Fridays.
Beautiful.
And it is a time where I encourage us to talk about just anything that we want, not work.
And maybe, I don't know if that's working, but if you want to make it more specific, because sometimes people find if you say, tell us anything, but if you say, what's the one thing you wish you had more time to do? Or just draw a picture and tell us your story.
Okay.
And then you give an example and you show yours. Mm-hmm. You could say, like, this is mine. If I was doing one, I'd say, this was South Africa, this is America. And look, I can't draw, so you don't need to feel like it's got to be a masterpiece. I moved here. But something that allows people to tell their story. Ashley, that's awesome.
Thank you.
And I'm sure people have enjoyed that.
Yes.
Other good questions around favorite, you know, it's around stories and memories, and what's your earliest childhood memory? It's interesting what people come up with. And sometimes it's joyful and sometimes it's hard, but it's allowing people to tell their stories. And I'm going in order of what I see on the gallery view. Lee, for you, what has resonated so far?
I mean, so far, you know, one thing I can kind of relate to that we've discussed is just, you know, when you talk about energy and just having that genuine interest, that's been so much of my experience when, you know, I've been in groups of people and sometimes I'm in a room where we're just kind of discussing like a topic. And I remember being younger and just opening my mouth and talking about things I didn't really know about, but I was super interested in it. And then everybody just looked up to me as a leader, and I was like, I don't know anything about this, but all of a sudden now people are asking me questions about it. And so that's always one of those things I can relate to, of being able just to, if you're speaking with energy, and then sometimes if you have that shred of just you find something that you've got that interest in, you know, it is something that people just generally connect with. And I've also find myself doing it with other people where I tend to get drawn in by that as well. And I also tend to feed off a little bit sometimes of the energy in the room. And I think at times for me, my struggle would be when I hit that wall of that one negative person that it's just like, you know, how all of a sudden I'm trying to overcoming that because it throws me off my game, and all of a sudden all the techniques I've had get thrown out the window for a second, not because I'm throwing them out the window, just because my mind gets that blank.
Okay, so that's interesting. Now I'm going to show you a technique now, which is before I answer, do any one of you have a thought of how do you handle that one difficult individual? Anybody else other than me, just raise your hand and unmute would like to answer. I'm looking at the next page. Anybody want to answer how you've dealt with the difficult person?
I don't know if you want to hear from me, Nadia.
Yes, please, Nikki, yes.
I feel like usually, you know, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, they're trying to tell you something, you know, with their behavior or with whatever they said that was negative. And so I like to seek further information. I want to know where it's coming from. So I ask questions to that person directly. And if it's a situation that doesn't need to be a conversation in front of people, then I'll follow up with them, you know, post-meeting.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. And to that point, in addition, you never want to look defensive. And that's hard because remember that we don't perceive verbal attack any differently to physical attack. Well, what happens if Chris Irvin reaches out and slaps me across the face? I'm going to do that, you know, fight, flight, or freeze, right? I'm going to defend myself. If we are not tuned on to a self-awareness, self-monitoring channel, we can perceive that as an attack and get very defensive. That never serves us well. So to Nikki's point, it's the ability to assume positive intent, to look at somebody and go, I'm sorry you feel that way. Is that something you and I can take offline? Or simply say to the group, does anybody else feel that way? And usually what happens is you have everybody else going, no, perhaps something, but you want to de-escalate it. Have you ever been in a meeting where somebody is attacking and then the person responds and it just becomes out of control? So you've got to think of it, if it's your meeting and you are conducting it, you are the mature, evolved person who can take anything, appreciate that thought, and you never want to say to the person, that is ridiculous, that is totally irrelevant. What you want to say, as Nikki nicely did, was, I want to understand that more so you and I can take this offline in a very neutral way. Remember, it's not only what you say, it's how you say it. I always think of the McCain-Obama primaries, and I don't remember what was said, but I remember Obama stayed very calm. And McCain got so riled up. And that's all I remember thinking, I wish I could have helped McCain just look very calm. And in these kind of situations, your ability to be the mature, evolved person. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, and he said, between stimulus and response, there lies a space. And in that space lies your power to choose. And in that power is what is the most forceful thing. So think about that, is you can choose how to respond to someone who's derailing you. Now, if I'm in an actual physical situation and two people are talking to each other, I go up to them and I put my hands on their shoulders. Then if they carry on talking, I dig my nails in and then they shut up. It works every time. Joking. No, yeah. But you can, you know, again, now I hope you notice what I did is if you've got 4 or 5 people in your meeting and someone asks a question, don't feel that as the facilitator, you've always got to be the one answering the question. We're trying to do 3 things in our meetings: invite participation, maintain momentum, and manage dissent. And maintaining momentum means if somebody brings something out of the blue, you can simply say, thank you for that, Randy. I want to keep us just for the purposes of time, but I am going to put it in the parking lot. Famously, we all know the parking lot, but famously, we also know everybody wants their parking validated. I hear you, I see you. Don't ever want to make someone feel like they're a fool, because we want to encourage dialogue. But then just ways of maintaining momentum, but inviting participation means that I don't always need to be the one speaking. And also, if my job is to empower my team and to motivate them, and someone asks me a question, I can say, you know, Kay and I were discussing that earlier, and Kay is doing that so well. Kay, won't you share your best practice with the group? that is the difference. As leaders, we are there to nurture, to grow, and to develop others, and use every opportunity. People won't look at you and say, oh, she didn't know everything. So I'm going to go around and carry on. And now it's Keisha. Keisha, for you, Keisha Hernandez. What has resonated with you? Tell us, or if you have a best practice.
Really, what I was thinking about in my own job, it entails a lot of creativity and trying to reach people, you know, in a creative way. I do a lot of training and things like that. And what I found is that in this time of crisis, you know, there's people that have been really innovative and kind of thrived in the chaos, and were able to get out there and do new things and try new things. And then I found that some people struggled with that. You know, in the time of crisis, they weren't able to find that motivation, that creativity, and to step outside the box. So when you first started talking about, you know, positive memories, I thought, is this something that could also help with encouraging that creativeness and that outside of the box thinking, so that we can, you know, meet the needs of our clients and our staff, but you know, in new ways as we are, you know, navigating a new world.
So thank you for that, Keisha. And I've been reading a lot about neuroscience, and I did this TEDx talk. It's TEDx Emory, and it's called Own Your Confidence. And I read extensively, and I've really been studying the brain's capacity to reflect on positive past experience and to allow it to impact how you project confidence. And there was a neuroscientist at Emory in the audience, and he came up to me afterwards. He said, Nadia, all my research reinforces what you're saying. And whether you call it, like Dr. Galen Cole does, thought conversion therapy, or I call it your positive emotional memory data bank, it's the ability to shift. Because at the end of the day, and Dr. Cole said this in his interview, if you think that depression, and I'm speaking to therapists here, you know, one of the famous things we say is let people be their experts in what they're experts in. But you know, deep depression comes from a belief that you could change the past, right, in some way. And he says, if you can learn from the past, anxiety from concern about the future. So instead of concern, prepare for the future, but find a way of living in the present. But then what happened in the past impacts your present. So just, I think Keisha well said, and I'm going to read what Randy said. When you ask people if they also feel the same as a negative and they say yes, what are some keys to keep to hear your team, sometimes ensure that people know they are heard and validated, push forward? So Randy, wherever you are, Randy, can you just say that again? I'd be so grateful.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to type that in follow up to the original question.
Okay.
That we were experiencing. So I don't want to derail from the current.
No, not at all.
But I know that you were doing a really good job about how we can kind of take some things offline. You know, sometimes we may ask, is someone else experiencing these negative feelings or thoughts around a direction?
Oh, yes.
And, you know, you said oftentimes other people may be like, oh, no. And it's like that one person, and we kind of take it offline. Well, that's not always the case.
That's true.
And we are very emotive people here at Georgia Hope. We are feelers with big hearts. And so there are those times that even though we're seeking and striving to build solid relationships and solid foundations before we have to bring about challenging conversations, those things do happen. And you may say, does anyone else feel negatively
and everyone goes,
and everyone's like, yeah. And you're like, okay, let's not be defensive. Let's pull in my positive thoughts. Let's be a good expert, but also validate and do all the other things, and then rally the troops to do the thing that needs to be done.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. And so true. So for example, I say, you know, Michelle brings up something and I say, how many other people feel like that? And everyone goes like that. You want to be able to say, thank you for bringing that to my attention, because our intention here is only to create the most positive experience. Our intention is not to make you feel that way. In crucial conversations, one of the most powerful statements is intention. And please, I might not be able to come up with all the answers to address it now, but I promise you this is something we're going to take very seriously. And then you have to. You have to do that. So thank you. Yes.
I think Nadia, at the and sorry for assuming this, Randy, this might not be the truth, but I think probably one of the challenges that we face in the work that we do, given that we are, pretty much state and Medicaid funded, there are some limitations that we run into that don't give us, bandwidth to make decisions that are backed by funds. We have to make decisions basically on a shoestring budget. They're not always popular decisions. So there are times that, we have to put something in place that people don't agree with. But really what we're trying to get at is, so thank you for sharing that you don't agree with it, but it's transitioning to then solution-focused conversation. If this isn't a solution that is palatable, let's talk about what is. And then of course, there are times where we just have to do what we have to do. And nobody likes it. I don't like it. You know what I mean? But that's what we have to deal with. And I think we're faced with that just more so than most industries, just by virtue of who our funders are and the barriers that come with state and Medicaid funding.
But can we agree, as long as you are transparent and authentic? So if somebody comes up, as you've just said, I think people want you to do what Nikki just said. Personally, I wish it were different. I need to tell you where we're at. I think you just said it. What I see in communication and communication to individuals is they just want you, if it's bad news, I don't want you to sugarcoat it, but also the way you said it is, I promise you, I care about you. These are our limitations. And it's as long as it's done with the intention of integrity and authenticity, because we will know as your team members if you're lying to us. Even if it's difficult to say, you can say, Megan's talking to her team and she goes, guys, I want you to know this is difficult for me. I don't fully understand it myself. But this is the message I've been asked to relay. As soon as I get information, I will promise to you. What people despise is if they feel you know something or you're being tricked, right? And the way you just said that, Nikki, was perfectly, this is the situation. We understand that. I tell the story. I don't know how many of you watched. There was the Michael and Kathy Lee show. Not Kathy Lee. She's now on in the morning show. Anybody watch that show?
No, I don't.
There's a morning show, very famous show, and I can't remember it.
I was Regis and Kathy Lee, and
thank
now
you,
I'm
Christine.
with Kelly.
Excellent. Do you see how inviting participation with my bad memory, Christine? So who's it now? It's now live with
Kelly Ripa and the various sundry men that
right. It's Kelly Ripa. So Kelly Ripa used to be on with Michael Strahan. Okay.
He used to be. It's not him anymore, I don't think.
It's not anymore. It's now the guy from American Idol.
Ryan Seacrest.
Thank you. You see?
See, Jamie.
Collective brain is so much better than one. Anyway, when Kelly Ripa was on with Michael Strahan that afternoon, I was speaking at Coke about exactly this topic, authentic leadership. And I was just saying, Kelly, it just happened to be that nobody told her that he was leaving. So she gets to work and nobody's told her, and she hears about it before much after it was in the news. And the point I wanted to make about that, and I'm sure there are many, many, many more examples about that that are much better, but it's the one that comes to mind in this moment, is your teams don't want to hear things from others, and they don't want to hear things at the water cooler. They want to hear it from you to your best of your ability. And you can always say, that is what I know right now. I promise you, like we do as newscasters, this is the information I have at my fingertips. I promise you, when I know more, I will give you more. But we all want authenticity, because trust, the foundation of everything we speak about is trust. And how do we build teams of people who trust us and who believe us and truly believe we have their best interests at heart? Because that is the most motivating thing. So we have reached 2:28. I always say good presentations start on time. They usually end early. And in a virtual world, ending early is good. Are there any last questions before I wrap up? Because I believe that if you give a presentation or lead a meeting, you always want to end on you, not the Q&A. Any other last thoughts, questions? Nikki, is there anything you wanted to add to any of that? Or Stephanie, or Candy, or Jamie, or Megan, or Lee, or Christine, or Anne, or Tiffany? Nikki, any last thoughts before I do my final wrap up?
Yeah, and Nadia, I try not to speak up too much, just because this isn't about me per se. I want everybody to get the full benefit and not constantly hear me. But I would like to continue this conversation with everybody, and we're scheduled for another hour or so. Two of my takeaways from this is everything begins with yourself, and everything really builds on connection. I mean, beautiful. Really, truly. And so if you think about authenticity and trust building and communication, I think that all starts with you and connection. I don't think you can get to connection if you aren't being authentically yourself, if you aren't communicating in a transparent, genuine way. So that's kind of what I'm taking away from this. Definitely values and attributes I subscribe to, and would love to talk to the team about what their thoughts are and how they feel about that.
So before you get to your next hour, first of all, thank you all. Thank you to Georgia Hope for all the work that you do. Thank you for Nikki for inviting me. It's really an honor to speak to people who are doing the work you're doing, and I look so forward to staying in touch. What we've looked at today is 4 foundational principles for building rapport and continuing to lead both in person and remotely. And we looked at, as Nikki says, how you feel about yourself, showing genuine, authentic interest in others, the ability to build relationships and relax, and the verbal and non-verbal of energy, excitement, and enthusiasm. All I ask you to do is to think about these things, and in any interaction, take yourself off autopilot. I'm also going to send Nikki the link to my TEDx Emory talk, Own Your Confidence, because it just goes into a little more detail. But I promise you, if you practice these things, if you develop that deep meta-awareness and consciously make the most of every interaction, you will continue to go personally and professionally from strength to strength. So thank you all so much. It's almost magic, right? I virtually remove myself from this meeting, and please link in with me, Nadia Bilchik. I have an Own Your Network Facebook community. Please join it, Own Your Network with Nadia Bilchik, and let's make this the beginning of our connection to a collaboration. Thank you all
so much, Nadia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.